Good afternoon, and welcome to The Road to Recovery, The Road to Freedom with Mark. This is my 28-minute slot every Friday where I do my thing, talk about mental health issues. It's my main thing. It's what I do, and something, unfortunately, I have a lot of experience with over many, many years, and as a result, I've got to meet a lot of people in that world. You find throughout life you're always surrounded by people like yourself. You don't tend to mix with people who are not like you. That's human nature. We tend to separate ourselves rather than include people. We exclude. We build barriers, be they borders of countries or fences or locks on doors. And we're the same socially. We tend to exclude people, especially if those people don't fit into what we like, if we find them dangerous, if we find them disturbing. We tend to exclude those people, and my whole thing today is about a little kindness goes a long way. It can make an enormous difference in somebody's life, just a kind word. And, I am a great believer that in the end we all get what we deserve. And I honestly believe that we deserve better than what we have. And the reason that it isn't better is us. We essentially are either the solution or the problem, and being the solution takes no more effort than being the problem. It is no harder to put rubbish in a rubbish bin than what it is to throw it on the ground. It is no harder to use a pedestrian crossing than to hold traffic up and just be a pain in the butt. It doesn't take a lot of thought or effort to do the right thing. And doing the right thing by people is simply showing common courtesy, caring enough about those around you to realise that they are your community, they are your society, and your society will never be pleasant unless you make it that way. And if you do nothing, then it will be unpleasant. Because that is the way of the world, the way of the universe. Nothing ever stays still and unchanged forever, not even the mountains. Everything starts and everything finishes. It evolves, it grows, and that is something that we can do in our world to make it better. I was always brought up believing that boys don't cry, that to show your emotions was to show weakness, to be less of a man, and that it was a brave thing to battle on regardless. And those kind of silly ideas, these bad attitudes of society, are very, very hard to change, to break down, and it takes a long time. You've got to constantly chip away at it until it gains traction. People are very, very, very reluctant to stop doing the wrong thing because, hey, that's the way we've always done it. Why question it? Even if it's wrong, we just keep doing it because that's what we've always done. That's what our fathers did. That's the way it's always been in this world. But bit by bit, things can change. To give you an example, back in the day, we all used to throw rubbish out the car windows on the street when we were driving along, and there was litter blowing all over the show. And the only reason we weren't knee-deep in our own crap is because there weren't that many of us. But over a period of time, some 40-odd years, that has become extremely socially distasteful. You simply don't do things like that. And if you do, people look on you as if you are some kind of a monster. And you are, really. I mean, why filthy up the world when you don't have to? The point I make is that over a period of time, we made a social change. And this is just starting to happen in mental health. But unfortunately, what tends to happen is we go through this bubble, the bubble syndrome, this boom and bust. Everyone gets on board. And just a few months ago, there was all this I am hope, and you just heard mental health just being battered away on the television, the radio, everywhere you went. Every second word was about mental health. But now, people are over it, and it's kind of starting to fade away. And this is my biggest fear, is that we build up this head of steam, all this momentum, and then we just let it fade away and we move on to the next fancy thing. And that seems to be global, I don't call it warming anymore. What do they call it now? Change, of course, change, which of course means nothing. I mean, what does change mean? Change means hotter, colder, less rain, more rain. It means everything, and therefore it means nothing. So people are determined to fix the nothing problem about nothing. They don't really understand what the hell it is that they're talking about. I've never heard it defined, ever. What do they mean by change? What change? How does it change? What does it do? How the mechanics of this thing actually work? No one's ever bothered. And it's the same with mental health. A lot of people don't solve problems because they don't understand the problems. And it's only through talking with each other about mental health issues that we get to understand, and often a problem shared can be a problem solved. Others will look at things from a perspective that you do not. Often, if you're suffering from mental health, you get tunnel vision. You're trapped and you can't, for the life of you, see any way out of your problems. Sometimes they can be solved by somebody else fairly easily. So it's important, I think, especially with men. Women tend to talk a lot. That's their thing. That's what they do. But men tend to be a lot quieter about these sort of things. And we've got to make it understood that it is socially acceptable to say that you're having problems and to try and solve those problems and be a happier person. Because if you're a happier person, that radiates out throughout your family and everything. So I'm not saying it's easy, but it's important that you share with decent people if you can. Right, well, time is always against me, so I'm going to do my little story. It's my thing. I'm going to publish these one day, the whole lot. I'm going to write a book. I sincerely hope you buy it when you see it. I don't know what it's called yet, but I'll tell you. I'll tell you when it happens. It's one of my dreams, and it's good to have dreams. You know, it's good to have these amazing plans of things that you always want to do, and set your heart on it, set your sails, and never ever give up on those dreams. They are probably the most important things that you will ever have in your life, other than people you love. Right, this one here is called The End of the Road. The West Coast has always held a fascination for me. From the 90 to the fields of that spectacular side. The East has always been my favourite side, but the West always calls and challenges me. So I knew I had to go there, through the top gorge, the Bullet, and out to the West Coast at the top. But I was to be delayed unexpectedly. At the time, I was living in Pahiatua with my dog Diamond, me and the Diamond dog. I had just finished doing up and selling my house in Wainui for a good profit, but ended up having a breakdown. I had then bought a ute, computer, a huge trailer from my friend Keith, and a few other bits and pieces. I then bought my shop and flat in Pahiatua, moved 17 huge trailer loads of junk in, and taken on looking after Diamond Dog, a crazy mongrel that seemed to suit me well. I took to retraining the dog, already 3 years old, and reading maps, dreaming and planning. With a dog, I really got into the outdoors and came up with the idea of doing an extended camping holiday with my hound. I kept coming back to the west coast on the map. I had not really been south of Westport on the road, and it soon became apparent that was the road that was calling me. I compiled a huge and comprehensive list of all the gear I would need, mostly fishing, diving, camping and cooking gear. Then I systematically packed all the gear in fish bins and packed them perfectly in the huge tough tray on the ute. On the top of the bins, I put my rods and a single foam mattress, all covered and held down with a tonneau cover. Perfect. I wasted no time packing, knowing that everything I could possibly need. I had planned that part well. As for the journey itself, I had only planned to drive to Blenheim, then through to Renwick, the Wairarapa, St Arnaud, and then left after Murchison down 65 to Springs Junction on the Lewis Pass, where I hoped to catch up with an old friend, Tar. I had a fantastic trip down, from 3 a.m. to the ferry across from Wellington at 6, a great crossing through the Sounds, which I fell in love with as a child. I stopped in Blenheim for lunch in stores. The dog and I filled up with pies. It was great to retrace my steps through the vineyards to Renwick, then blast down the straight roads of the interior with the CD blasting out and the warm wind in my face. Past the north shore of Lake Rotoiti and the south side of the Kahurangi National Forest Park, and left after Murchison down to Springs Junction on the Lewis Pass. It was late by the time I got to Springs Junction. It was dark and grey, everything was shut, and it was obvious that I wouldn't be catching up with Tar. So I loaded the fish bins under the ute, brewed a coffee and crashed out with the dog on the tray of the ute. The foam mattress was super comfortable and the tonneau kept me dry, and sleeping in my sleeping bag with my back to the dog kept me warm. The next day I headed up to Reefton, and I was just so struck with the place. Many of the early buildings were still standing, real gems, and I spent the day enjoying coffees, walking the dog in the park and exploring the town. As an old gold mining town, it was steeped in history and was the first town in New Zealand to have electricity. In the afternoon, I stumbled upon a strange old hardware store and struck up a conversation with the owner. The conversation turned to gold panning, and he told me he had panned the Anungahua, which ran through town. He also told me of a spot just out of town called Slab Creek Hut, where I could go gold panning and camp for a night or two. So I bought a Mickey pan from him and headed to the spot, which was so beautiful, I knew straight away I had to set up camp and pan for a while. On arriving at Slab Creek, I noticed a wide dirt track heading up the hill. It led to a flattened area out of sight where pine trees had been cut and loaded up many years ago. The flat site had become overgrown with broom, and I found a protected campsite amongst the broom. Perfect. I set up my campsite hidden up there with the tarp on the ground, then the tent, then another tarp over the top of the tent tied to the broom, providing a waterproof cover and a protected area outside for my camp lounge and kitchen. Weka had spread throughout the undergrowth, and Diamond had great fun chasing them through their tunnels, but happily never managed to catch one. I made a wonderful fire that night and drifted off to sleep, serenaded by the weka, the moor pork and the river. Over the next week, I donned my wetsuit every day and headed up the creek to a large boulder that I thought might bear some gold. Every day, I dug my way down into the riverbed, panning as I went. Diamond Dog sat on the track some 20 metres away like a sentinel, patient and unmoving. I was worried she would attack passing strangers, but was rapt when I saw her let them pass without aggression. Being a pit bull cross, pretty solid and intimidating, with a bit of an aggressive mental streak, I had to watch her closely to avoid her harming anyone stupid enough to challenge me or her. She was so well behaved, and we spent some of the happiest days of my life, panning for gold and camping in the bush. After a few days camping, I decided to head back to town in the evening for a beer. The dog watched the ute while I had a couple of pints and won $500 on the pokies. Thanks to that wonderful win, I had a steak dinner at the pub every night, a few pints and a half a dozen beers to take back to camp. It was just paradise. Unfortunately, dogs were not allowed in the campgrounds, so the dog and I had to live at the creek, which in many ways was better. I also spent a bit of time driving around Reefton, photographing all of its wonderful buildings, places of history, river, railway station and so on. After a superb week in Reefton, I headed off with a few flakes of gold and memories I will never forget. I headed back up Highway 69 to Inangahua and then followed the Buller to the turn-off just before Westport and out on the coast at Charleston. I blasted down the coast at quite illegal speeds, past Punakaiki, the CD whamming it out full bore. As I got to the Grey River, the sky turned dark, and I realised what an appropriate name Greymouth really has. I stopped at Greymouth for lunch, and my dog bit some guy who came too close when I was eating. I loved to share my burgers with the dog, but made sure I didn't give her too much grease. I checked out the map at Greymouth and decided to head down the coast through Hokitika and Ross, then inland on Highway 6, then back out to the coast at a place called Okarito Lagoon. It was an inspired choice. There was a very basic campsite at Okarito, just campsites and fireplaces, but to its credit, it also featured a kitchen, dining room, toilet and showers. It was just perfect. I walked Diamond Dog down the beach every day, fished for and caught lots of rig and collected firewood. The rig, a type of very nice eating shark, were large and plentiful. The dog and I had all the fish we could eat, and the greedy hound could eat to her heart's content. At night, I would light big fires all night and get on the piss and smoke dope with the foreigners, touring the beautiful south. I remember a young English couple who were particularly fun, and I think they will remember our couple of nights together as the best of their New Zealand holiday. I spent a wonderful week at Okarito beneath the magnificent Southern Alps. Honestly, it moved my soul. Franz Josef was just down the road, so I stopped there for lunch and to visit the glacier. I was amazed at how busy the town was, with choppers constantly flying rich visitors to Fox Glacier. I drove up to Franz Josef and was very happy to be greeted by some mountain kia, but was shocked at just how far the glacier had receded. From Franz Josef I followed Highway 6 down to Haast, the last town of any significance on the west coast. I stopped at the Flash pub for a beer and a feed, resupplied and blasted down the road through Hannah's Green as the trees created the most incredible green tunnel as I neared the end of the road. From there to Neil's Beach to Patterson Inlet where the road finishes. As it turned out, no one lived there. There were only unoccupied buildings belonging to fishing companies, a wharf and a few commercial boats, anchored in the small bay. Some clever buggers had set up a mobile fish and chip shop there, so the dog and I had a good feed, then headed back to the last point of habitation, Neil's Beach. I cruised around in my Butte Commodore ute with its great big V6 Buick engine. The place was little more than a lightly populated village on the south side of the Arafota, but it still had the most magic feel to it. As I cruised out, I noticed some units that looked like tourist accommodation, so I stopped for a look. Pretty soon, Grant rocked up and introduced himself as the owner. I liked him straight away. Turned out he was a fisherman, my favourite kind of people, and he lived just down the road. He offered me a great deal on one of the units, which had a kitchen, a fridge and a good shower. Then he asked me to come down to his shed to have a beer with his mates. I unpacked and wandered down the road with the dog, and as soon as we got there, Diamond Dog got tongued up by one of Grant's mates' little dogs. We had a great laugh, and that helped with the introductions to a bunch of locals and a group of old guys who regularly came over from Queenstown. They were a great bunch of older guys who loved the West Coast, whitebaiting, fishing, eating crays and getting on the piss with their mates. Nice. We had a few beers and traded a few yarns. Then Grant invited me to come out the next day and pull a couple of cray pots for a feed. Of course, I jumped at the chance. The next day, we cruised round the corner of Patterson Inlet and I pulled two pots. I could not believe my eyes. In each pot there were about 18 magnificent, huge buck crays. It took only 10 to 15 minutes to get back to the inland, and we headed back to Grant's man cave and he steamed a heap of crays in an amazing gas-fired steamer Grant had made out of a metal beer keg. Grant was not just a fisherman, but an incredibly capable mechanic, engineer and entrepreneur. The 8 of us drank beer and scoffed huge crays all afternoon until I was fit to burst, so I thanked the lads and headed back to my unit. Before I left, Grant gave me 2 huge crays to scoff later. What a hell of a nice guy. When I got back, I had a shower and a few beers, but couldn't face any more crayfish, so I decided to give the 2 massive crays to Diamond Dog. To my astonishment, the greedy hound scoffed the lot, shells and all. Not often do I sleep so soundly, but that night was just so sweet. Even the hound slept soundly on the tray of the ute, a first for an animal that normally couldn't bear to sleep alone. For nearly a week, Diamond Dog and I walked the beaches down the bottom of the coast, at least 8 hours a day. We searched for shells and greenstone and were utterly tuckered out at the end of the day. We fished for rig and walked for miles and miles, and I never felt so close to my dog. We formed such a close bond, wandering along the beaches and up the incredibly beautiful rivers that flowed through awesome native bush. My favourite river was the Wairarapa, which finishes in the most magnificent blue as it nears the sea. The end of the road turned out to be better than I could have hoped, and Grant and his mates were so warm and welcoming I found it hard to leave. Grant shook my hand, said goodbye and told me I'd never be back again. I assure you, my friend, one day I will. From Neil's Beach, the dog and I blasted up the coast to Hokitika and had a good look around that sweet little town. I spent a whole day wandering around, checking out and photographing the incredible works of art the local carvers have turned out of greenstone. There were magnificent works of art there going for as much as 10 grand, which to my mind was still cheap for how beautiful, rare and wondrous they are. That night I got pissed up at the local pub and stayed out the back with my dog snoring at the foot of my bed. From Hokitika we shot back up the coast to the Bulla, just south of Westport, and headed inland along Highway 6 to 63 and crashed the night just out of St Arnaud on the north shore of Lake Rotoiti, falling asleep to the call of Moorpork. From there we headed home, and on the ferry out of Queen Charlotte I had that sinking feeling in my stomach that I always get when I leave that beautiful place. When we got home I spent quite a while looking back through the photos I took of that trip. It was one of those ones that delivered everything I could have hoped for. It's a place I know I just have to get back to again. The end. I keep looking at the clock, you might have noticed that. I try not to run over time, otherwise I've got to edit bits out and cut my story down and it makes for a shitty mess, so it's always nice to get things done on time. I'd just like to finish up by just saying thanks very much to all of the friends out there we have who tune into this show, please tell your friends about it and share it, not just in the Wairarapa, but up in the beautiful Hawke's Bay up there. I really appreciate everyone tuning in and listening to what all of us here at Arrow Radio have to say, our little stories, because, you know, it's only through a local radio like Arrow, a not-for-profit organisation, that allows people like me to have a voice at all. Otherwise, I'd be totally unknown and just another voice in the wilderness that nobody really cares about. So I am very, very appreciative of my time here, and I value it dearly. And I want to say a big thanks to Wairarapa TV for helping us expand, get out there to more people. We are, of course, on the internet. There's websites and all that jazz and podcasts. I'm not really au fait with that sort of stuff, but I'm sure you'll manage to find your way around at www.arrow.co. A big, big thanks to Veronica and Michael, who have always been there for me and always supported and encouraged me over the years. I've been doing this program for many years now, and I never tire of it. I have recently written some news stories, and once I've edited them a little bit more, I'll read those in with my older stories. My older stories are a little different, and I think they deserve their place in my repertoire. And, you know, I'm getting close to a decent-sized book, so, you know, it's a wonderful thing to be able to look forward to, doing a piece at a time, which are effectively almost like chapters, and seeing them slowly grow is really, really rewarding. And the funny thing is, the more I write, the more I remember of those times. That's just how synaptic contacts work. It's an amazing thing, and it is wonderful fun. Right, that's me for another week. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you very much for tuning in. As I say, share it with your friends, because as far as I'm concerned, what's going on overseas, whilst, you know, may have some effect on us, what's going on here in your country, in your town, your community is far, far more important. And, you know, I would like to think that we could encourage each other to support worthwhile things like Arrow Radio and Wairarapa TV. And, you know, I want to say a big thank you to all the sponsors, New Zealand On Air and all the rest of them who sponsor this show. Thank you very much for supporting what I consider to be an extremely worthy cause. Right, that's me for the week. Bye for now. Hope you enjoy the show, and I'll see you again next Friday. Cheers.
Thank you.